2 Corinthians 10:5. Okay. And then Matthew 5:27 and 28. One more, Frank, you'll get that one too. Okay, so back on page 19. What we're aiming at tonight is to talk about ages 13 and up. And by now you know my main emphasis at age 13 is what? A purity pledge. So everything we've talked about the last 2 weeks, going up through age 5 and then ages 6 to 12, is building to this purity pledge. And that's what we're going to spend a lot of our time talking about this evening. So by this time, if they don't already, your kids need to have a very good understanding of the external and internal reproductive systems of both genders. Again, there are diagrams, detailed diagrams in the book that you got with this class and in the kids' books that I recommend by Stan and Brenna Jones. They need to understand the mechanics of heterosexual intercourse. They need to have an understanding of the God-given role of intercourse, that it's something that married people do. It does make babies, but it's also something married people do because it's part of marriage. It's part of the gift that God has given to married couples. So it's for reproduction and for pleasure. They don't need to, and in fact probably shouldn't have an understanding of what the pleasure side of it is. And that's part of the whole reason for making this purity pledge by age 13, which I'll explain here in a minute. And of course they should understand the differences between men and women and boys and girls in the area of sexuality and in general. Number 2, we need to stress again that God has given the gift of sexuality specifically to married couples. We want our boys and girls, as they hit age 13 or so, to understand that what we're talking about is a gift that God has given for the exclusive use, the way God has prescribed it for married couples, and that's how they should look at it. Our approach here, number 3, is aimed at inviting our kids and encouraging them, in fact rallying them, to make a pledge of purity at age 13, at or about age 13. Number 4, we should talk with them, and the children's books by Stan and Brenna Jones do go into this, about sexually transmitted diseases such as gonorrhea, syphilis, herpes, AIDS, genital warts. If that's not enough to scare them into purity, I'm not really sure what would be at age 12 or 13. They need to understand that sexual relations expose them to the entire pool of all of their sexual partners. All of those are plural possessive. Partners, P-A-R-T-N-E-R-S apostrophe, plural possessive. Sexual relations exposes both people to the entire pool of sexual diseases of their sexual partners up to that point, and their partners and their partners and their partners and so on. The odds are not very good over time for promiscuity. Contrary to what they will hear, a condom is not safe sex. We will talk about that much more specifically 2 weeks from tonight, and you'll hear probably my second favorite guest speaker, Fran Shaka. But condoms are not safe sex. And Joe White touched on this. Why are condoms not safe sex?
Doesn't protect the heart.
Doesn't protect the heart. Doesn't protect the emotions. Doesn't protect the spirit. It doesn't protect the person. All it does is provide a physical barrier of not 100% effective value, by the way, to anything against pregnancy and sexually transmitted diseases. That's all it does. It doesn't protect anything else. God has given us sexuality for a complete realm of things in a relationship, not just the physical. Condoms are oriented only to the physical. And of course, unplanned pregnancy is also a risk anytime there's sexual activity. Again, even more important is to explain, number 5, the unanticipated emotional consequences. For girls, a feeling of being used, a feeling of being taken advantage of. Typically, what do the boys say to get sex? I love you. What do the girls want to hear? Do the boys really mean that? No. They don't. That's just how it is. The boys say that, the girls want to hear it. They may give in because they think the boy really means it, the boy really doesn't mean it. So the girls are used in this process. They feel used, they know they've been used, they feel cheap. How about for the boys? Joe White talks about how he thinks the boys are more tender than what we think. There's a definite feeling of knowing that they've used somebody else, that they've sinned, that they've taken advantage of somebody else. Really under false pretenses if you get right down to it. And they've taken advantage of someone they likely have no intention of marrying. I'm not sure that I think every boy feels that sort of remorse over that, but I'm confident that Joe White is right in many cases. And I think our boys need to understand that is not the right way to look at or relate to or use girls. That's just not God's design. Who has 1 Timothy 5, 1 and 2? Okay, Frank.
Do not rebuke an older man, but exhort him as a father. Younger men as brothers, older women as mothers, and with all propriety, a younger woman as sisters.
So basically, this is the message saying we should look at men, we should look at older women as mothers, younger women as sisters. Basically, if you get down to the four corners of Scripture, we have, again, one sanctioned outlet like we talked about in week 3 for sexual desire, and that's our wife, and that's it. Someone who is not yet our wife, someone who may become our wife, someone we're engaged to and we think will become our wife, is not yet our wife, and our boys need to understand that. They need to understand there is no God-sanctioned outlet for sexuality except in marriage, once married. For both, there's an overall cheapness to the beauty of God-given sexuality. There's an inability to look at your partner the same way ever again. How many of you had sex ed in, I'll say in high school? I did. What did you learn in sex ed in high school? What did you learn about?
A lot of the sexually transmitted diseases.
STDs? What else?
Protection.
What kinds of protection did you learn about?
Oh, I'm sure the pill and condoms.
Anything else?
Anatomy, just
Anatomy?
Yeah, anatomy.
Believe it or not, and this is going way, way back. Again, I don't only want to say exactly how far back. When I was in high school, we even learned about IUDs and spermicidal foam. This is a long, long time ago. Now, I did grow up in the liberal northwest Chicago suburbs, but we learned about all of that. What else did you learn about in sex ed class?
I was say abstinence was mentioned.
Was
But
mentioned.
it was not seen as a probability.
So we'll say it was mentioned. All right, anything else? What does all this stuff have in common?
It's your physical
It's
body.
physical. Isn't that interesting? And again, our kids did the sex ed in the public schools, in the Jenks public schools. I think you can pull them out if you want to. I think that's okay, as long as you're making sure to do a comprehensive, thorough job on the topic yourself. I don't think you have to pull them out, but I think you have to do a comprehensive, thorough job, whether you leave them in the school or not. You have to do it anyway. But if they're in the school, this is mostly what they're going to learn. This is what you learned. What they don't learn about is the emotional connection. What they don't learn about is that when they're walking down the hall in high school and they encounter that person, that girl or that guy for the next 3.5 years or 2 years or 1.5 years, they will never look at that person the same again ever after that. I don't think they're learning that in school even today, even in Tulsa, Oklahoma. You have to teach them that. You have to be the one to bring that message to them. This is so important. In God's design for sexuality, it is not merely physical. It is not merely physical. It is an ultimate physical expression of something much deeper than that. It's something emotional, spiritual, mental. It's a connection. It's a connectedness with the other person at many levels which manifests itself in sexuality. But our kids will only hear that from us. So we've got to be the persons to tell them that. How about 1 Corinthians 6, the second part of verse 12 there, Bobby? Is that yours, Bobby?
Yeah.
So 12b through 16?
All things are lawful for me, but I will not be dominated by anything. Food is meant for the stomach, and the stomach for food, and God will destroy both one and the other. The body is not meant for sexual immorality, but for the Lord, and the Lord for the body. And God raised the Lord, and will also raise us up by his power. Do you not know that your bodies are members of Christ? Shall I then take the members of Christ and make them members of a prostitute? Never. Or do you not know that he who is joined to a prostitute becomes one body with her? For it is written, the two will become one flesh.
In essence, we can take this passage with our kids and explain that anyone who joins with another person sexually, prostitute or not, becomes one person with that person. God has prescribed that we become one flesh with our marital partner, and that's all. Who's got Galatians 5, 19 through 21? Okay, Charlotte.
Now the deeds of the flesh are evident, which are immorality, impurity, sensuality, idolatry, sorcery, enmities, strife, jealousy, outburst of anger, disputes, dissension, factions, envying, drunkenness, carousing, and things like these, of which I have forewarned you, just as I have forewarned you, that those who practice such things will not inherit the kingdom of God.
Okay, so simply stated, sexuality outside of marriage is prohibited. It's not part of God's plan. That's Ephesians 5:3. Okay, Justin.
But among you there must not be even a hint of sexual immorality or of any kind of impurity or of greed, because these are improper for God's holy people.
What do you hear in that passage that elevates this to a different level?
Ahead of it.
A hint. Must not even be a hint of sexual immorality. That's even the level beyond actual sexual morality. It means we should have a reputation that's such that people know we're not going to engage in this. And again, this is what we want to refer to with our kids, are these passages. Number 6, you want to extol for your kids, your teenage kids or your almost teenage kids, the wonder of remaining sexually pure and being able to give themselves completely to their future wife or their future husband. Again, number 7, I'm going to twist your arms off to around age 13, make a purity pledge with your kids. Now, can you force them to do this? What happens if you do that? What happens if you just say, hey, you're going to make a purity pledge this weekend?
Won't mean anything.
Probably not going to mean anything. Maybe they go through the motions. Are they going to own it? They're not going to own it. Can you just tell them this on the eve of their 13th birthday? Hey, tomorrow I'd really encourage you to make a purity pledge. How's that going to work? So what do you have to be doing as you lead up to this age?
We're talking about it.
You have to be dialoguing about it. You know, it was so interesting in our family, Katie and Jonathan, because they had an older brother and an older sister who'd already done this, they kind of knew about it at age maybe 11, 10, 11, somewhere in there. And they indicated they were ready to do it then. And I held off. I thought it was better to wait until they were just a little bit older. Again, around age 13 to me was the sweet spot. So we waited, and I said, hey, I think that's fantastic. You want to do that? I want you to lose that, and we're going to do that when you hit around age 13. Why would you guess that I'm so hot on the idea of not waiting very much past age 13? What's the problem with that? Any guesses?
Because you want to hit it before like all the emotions of
All the emotions and all the what? All the hormones.
Yeah.
You're both on it. So remember we talked about age 12, right? Here's 0. Not much going on sexually to age 12. There's age 18. The boys hit their peak right there. The girls, you know, we don't really know. I kind of joked with you guys about that a few weeks ago. But here's the range right here. What if you wait till here? What if you wait till 16?
Probably too late.
They're already feeling the physical sensations of it. They can't help it. It's not their fault. It's how their body's made. They're already feeling the physical sensations of it. It's already interesting. At age 12 or 13, when you first, you talked about this last week, when you first tell your kids about intercourse, what do they probably think? if you do it at the age I recommend.
Ew.
You, gross, that's perfect. That's the perfect age to tell them about intercourse, when they think it's gross and they think you. Or like maybe the girl thinks, boy, I would never want to do that. And you would be surprised at how many boys, age 10, are like, I would never want to do that. That's gross. I will never want to do that. That's the age to be talking to them about this stuff. Because if you get them right here, right here, then as they get through the hormone years, and the hormones are coursing through their blood veins, it's already how they think about it. It's already part of how they look at it. It's already part of their view of sexuality. We don't want to be trying to monkey with their view once they're already feeling it. We want that view cemented in place before they start going through that. And that's why I twist your arms off to do this around age 13. I think this book that we use for this class against it, I think it's an excellent book. But in the book, they talk about a pleasure around age 16. That's too late. That was too late in 1993 when the book was published. I was surprised when I got the book and read it that they were advocating 16, 13. How many of you have kids that are rapidly approaching age 13? You're in the thick of it. You're in the thick of it. So it's time to kind of get caught up with the outlines we went over the last 2 weeks and get ready, because this is where you need to be headed next.
Question on that, is there a
Yeah.
reason that you chose to wait when they wanted to do it earlier than 13?
I
Why
felt
did you
better
wait?
about them having just a tiny bit more maturity. I really think we could have done it, Julie, with those two at age 11. I would say Jonathan, I probably was even more inclined to wait. Katie's always been kind of a really mature thinker and has very high standards. And I don't mean purity standards, she has those too, but she just has high standards for everything. Jonathan was very little boyish. He still is in a way, a sense of humor, like he just keeps me cracking up all the time. I thought he could use a little bit more maturity. I wanted to make sure they really owned and understood the commitment. But if you have a kid that you think is really ready around age 11 or 12, I would not discourage you from doing it then. But I think it's important that they really understand kind of what the commitment is that they're making. So it's a great question, and that was just my own personal preference. Yeah, Jeremy.
I'm not gonna argue with
That's okay, you can.
you. How can they understand the commitment they're going to make if they don't feel it? I mean, at the age of 13 or 12 or 13, I can make that commitment, and it'll be easy to make that commitment.
Mhm.
And when 14 rolls around, 2 years ago I made a commitment, 16 rolls around, I've been wearing, I don't know if boys wear a ring or not, but I've
They
been wearing
do.
this ring for years. It's part of me, but it's meaningless. My point is, how can you make a commitment unless you feel it? What, you know,
This-
draw
Sure.
something in the sand and
They
say,
don't-
I will not. It's more I.
Your thinking is that they don't know enough yet to really make and own that kind of a commitment.
Right, they don't have the emotional capacity to understand, I really want to do that.
And what I would tell you, Jeremy, is I think they really do. I think the view you're espousing short sells to kids. I think they really do have the emotional capacity to understand enough of it to make the commitment. And again, what I would say is, if you wait too long, they're already engaged in the feelings, and it's really hard to get their attention then. Now, if you were talking about saying, you know, we're going to keep dialoguing on this a couple times a year, and I want you to make a commitment around 15 or 16, I guess you could do that. I will tell you from our standpoint, we did all 4 of ours at age 13, and I can tell you they are all on track. And I'm not saying that's 100%. We're going to talk tonight about being very careful about what to do with the possibility of mistakes, what I would call mistakes, or kids that may not keep their commitment. Okay, but I would say I think they really do have the capacity to make the commitment, and I think they can understand enough of it. And you can tell me, and I think I've said this to this class before, you can tell me, you know, Scott, you're brainwashing them before they have enough information to understand it. I'm happy to be accused of that. If you want to say I'm brainwashing them, I don't really care what you call it. I'm fine with that. I'm more interested in what's best for the kids. And if somebody wants to tell me that's what they think it is, that's fine. I'm going to tell them, and I'm going to rally them. I'm not going to make them do the commitment. So remember that. You can't make them do it. But I'm gonna encourage them by building up to it over a couple of year period, leading up to age 13. And by then, it was a big deal for all of them. It's a big deal for all of them.
I think
That's my experience.
I think I understand what he's talking about, is, it's probably a discerning thing that a parent would have to
Sure.
look for in a kid that's 13 to know, one, if they're mature enough and ready, because some kids may not be ready at that age. But I think once they do that, if they're willing to do that, there's gotta be a part that we play as parents in the years to come to help them
Absolutely.
keep that commitment and understand more about it. If you thought at 13, they're like, well, I'm not
That's
sure.
right.
So 14, 15, and 16, if we don't continue that
That's right.
conversation about that period, they could probably just go off
No.
the cliff and be like,
Yeah.
I didn't make that commitment.
Yeah, you make an excellent point, Frank. It doesn't, the fact that they do it right here doesn't mean it just stops there. The dialogue has to keep on going. But the other thing I would say is, most of our kids, will rise to the level of maturity and seriousness about this that we project an expectation and a belief that they can achieve. Most of them will engage at that level if we don't just use the words, but if we clearly convey confidence that they are able to engage with us on this. And they'll subscribe to it. I think you'd be surprised. But Frank makes a good point. I mean, it is up to each parent's discretion. Some of you may have kids you want to do this with and want to do it younger. And by all means, an excellent point, Frank. The dialogue doesn't just stop there when the ring goes on, or the necklace, or whatever it is they pick.
Is it, did we talk about what little item that should be?
Yeah,
Okay,
almost
I'll
there,
wait
almost there.
Okay.
You don't have to wait very long.
2 more minutes, I guess.
Yeah, okay.
And I'll let you have it.
Sure.
So I'm a firm believer, and it's in the world, it's in business, and it's in personal lives, that authority and responsibility has to go hand in hand, and if it's separate, it doesn't work, right? So if I have an employee and I give them the responsibility to do something, but not the authority to carry it out, it just doesn't function. And it's the same way here. I'm giving a child at the age of 13 to be responsible for their purity in the future. But at the age of 13, if I had a girl, I would not give her the responsibility in that I know exactly if she's having sex or not, because I know where she is.
When you say responsibility, what are you hearing me say?
I'm hearing you say,
What are you hearing me say? When I'm saying we make a pledge at 13, what are you hearing me say that you're concerned about?
okay,
Sure.
at the age of 13, I'm not giving her the responsibility with her time, I guess, because I know.
Of course not.
I know where she is.
No, I'm not suggesting that.
And at the age of 15 and 16,
No.
she'll have a lot more freedom.
I'm not suggesting that, but I want her to make that pledge at the earliest time that I think she's mature enough to understand it, to mentally, sort of academically understand it, and to be able to be resolved enough to commit to it. I'm not interested in waiting until she has all the physical sensations, because when she gets those, I want this to be part of how that whole thing is framed for her already. That's what I'm saying. I think there's lots of things in life that we educate people for and we prepare them for, and then when they hit that threshold, we commit to it. I mean, a driver's license could be a case in point, and we educate them and then we turn them loose. I'm not sure it's a good idea for a 16-year-old to be turned loose in the car either, but we let them do that after they've had a certain amount of training, and now it requires a certain amount of hours behind the wheel, which was better for the last two that we had than the first two. And I think it's very similar here. We just need this to be part of how they think about this as they enter that stage. That's what I would emphatically encourage you to do. At the end of the day, Jeremy, you and Liz are the expert on your kids, and that's why you get paid the big bucks to be the parents. So all I'm doing is cheering you on to cheer your kids on. But at the end of the day, you're right. I mean, it's your choice, but do it one way or another. Do it one way or another.
Well, it's kind of like the 21 age for drinking.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna wait till my kid turns 21 and say,
That's
hey,
right. That's
all right,
right.
you're 21, here's the rules.
Yeah.
You know?
That's right.
You probably want to start telling them about it way in advance,
That's right.
because you know the world's gonna be telling them about it.
That's right.
And I think that's, to your point, I think that's what you're saying, is
Yeah.
age 13 is a beginning stage to go, look, it's a good time to make this promise and this purity.
Yeah.
Because you know in the years to come, as they get older and have more time,
Gonna be harder.
they're gonna be like, oh man, I wanna go try that.
Yeah.
But they're gonna think back on that moment of you saying,
That's
when you
right.
make this promise.
Yeah.
So,
Okay,
Makes sense.
so what we did, I guess, let me just go back to the outline here, number 7, item C. Also, keep in mind that they're getting messages from TV, from music, from peers at school, on the internet. You know, we didn't have internet when our kids were really young, so I always forget. I mean, there are all kinds of avenues. Justin has encouraged me to call this screen time. There's all kinds of screens, there's all kinds of avenues through which media will infiltrate your kids' worlds. And again, we have to beat all of that to the punch. We have to get there first for their benefit. In the book, there are some excellent questions that they call them reasons to wait for the boys and the girls. I think in the hardcover version, the page numbers may be different, but you'll find them in the book. And at an appropriate age, Julie, back to your question, what we did was we took each of our kids out to dinner. Beth and I went together with each kid, so we did Eric and Kristen and Katie and Jonathan, all right at around age 13. Before we went to dinner, we took them to Mardell, and each of them picked out their own ring. When we liked the idea of a ring that had a cross on it. If they had wanted to do something different, we would have been fine with that, but all of them liked that idea too. Kristen's, as it turned out, came from James Avery, the other 3 came from Mardell. We took them to dinner somewhere nice that made sense for them. And we had already talked about all this, but we kind of reviewed with them the commitment, the idea that they were committing to us and they were committing to God to keep themselves pure and to save themselves sexually until marriage. And we gave them the ring, and all 4 of them wear those rings to this day. Our daughter Kristen, our second child, who's married, she's been married coming up on 5 years this summer. I can't believe she's been married 5 years already, almost. And just before she got married, she brought me her purity ring, and she said, "Dad, what do I do with this now?" And I was taken aback. I didn't really expect that. It never occurred to me that she would think she should give it back or something. And I said, "That's yours for the rest of your life. You've done it right. You and John have done this right. And that's yours to wear or not. You can do whatever you want with it, but that's yours. You are still pure, and you are pure inside a marriage to engage in sexual behavior." So I like the idea of a tangible symbol. We used rings, could be a pin, could be a necklace, could be an ankle bracelet, but something that your child likes, and I encourage you to let them have a say in what that might be, and maybe to pick it out like we did. We took them to a nice dinner and gave them the ring, and again, they've all 4 of them have worn them ever since then. I want to show you again this picture, and I'm going to tell you a little story about this right here. I'm going to jump down for just a second to B, number 2, which is dating guidelines, and this is dad's role in the daughter's dating process. When my oldest daughter, Kristen, have I told you guys the story about when I first met her husband, John? I did tell you that one? Okay. Then let me tell you the other story, which is a little more recent than that. So my other daughter, Katie, is in college, and one afternoon she called on a Saturday, and that was very unusual. So she called, and she says, and Beth answered the phone, she says, "Is Dad there?" He said, "Yep." And she said, "Dad, I have someone who wants to talk to you." And so this young man came on the phone, and I'd actually met him before, but hadn't spent a lot of time talking to him. And he said, "I'd like your permission to take Katie on a date." And I said, "I think that'd be fine. And we plan to be up there in a few weeks visiting her, and if you're interested in Katie still at that time, I'd like to visit with you." And so he was, and they're still dating today. But around Thanksgiving week last fall, we went up there to see Katie, and I told Dan is his name, and I said, let's get breakfast. So we went to breakfast on Monday morning at a little diner in this little tiny town called Fulton, Missouri. And at some point, I explained to Dan about these purity rings. And I explained to him what we had done with the kids, and that I expected him, when he took Katie out, to bring her back, again, in the same condition as when he picked her up. She could have a bigger smile on her face, that would be fine. Otherwise, I want her in the same condition as when he picked her up. And I got out this picture that you're looking at right here, this very piece of paper. And it's just the 2 of us sitting in this booth, and I opened it up for him. And I thought, I'm going to show him this, he's going to glance at it. It'll be open for all of about 2 seconds, and I'll close it up. And I showed it to him, and he kept looking at it. And I could tell he wasn't looking up at me, and he wasn't looking away, and he wasn't done. And so I just held it open for a while. And I don't really know how long he just stared at it. And I don't really know how long it was. It seemed like a long time. It was probably 30 seconds or maybe a minute. It was a very long time for something like that. And I finally said to him, and when he looked up at me, I could see he had beginnings of tears in his eyes. And I said, what are you thinking? You know, what's going through your mind? And he just said, he comes from a family of 6 siblings. And he just looked at me and he said, if we had done that, I think some things would be a lot different in our family. And that's all he said. And I didn't pry. I didn't need to know. And he comes, you know, he's got good parents, had a good Christian upbringing. Interestingly, his parents have split up. Even with 7 kids, that was really surprising when I heard that, I thought. But I'll never forget sitting across from him and having him just gaze, almost stare at this piece of paper, just wondering what was going through his mind exactly. So that was really meaningful to him. That was really meaningful to him. There's lots of other things I could tell you, but I've only got 15 minutes left, so I'll keep it moving.
I have a
Yeah.
comment on that.
Yeah.
I had one as well, but it was on my ring finger, and it was a little bit awkward when I got engaged.
Yeah.
Because I had to take my ring off in order to be engaged, and then I didn't have anywhere else to wear it. And so, as now a parent of that, to a daughter, I would strongly encourage you not to
Use
put
the ring
it,
finger?
not to use the ring finger
Yeah.
as your ring.
Use the other hand or a different
Yeah,
finger?
either other hand or a different finger,
Yeah.
because I couldn't figure out what to do with it after we were engaged. And after you're engaged, it's the time to have your purity ring on.
Yeah.
So.
Well said. Well said. Okay, so back up to the top of this page 21. Stress with your kids, with both of your kids, girls and boys, with both genders, the importance of being what they call in the book the moral cop. Stress to them the importance of being the one who keeps everything on track if necessary in that relationship. There'll be plenty of temptation for a young couple as they go through the engagement or even the courtship or even the dating process leading up to marriage. There's plenty of temptation. Stress the importance of both of them being the moral cop and holding the line. We already read 1 Timothy 5:1-2, but it's the one that says that men, we should treat older women as mothers and younger women as sisters. Stress the importance of that with our boys. And again, they may get peer pressure. You heard Joe White talk about Mark, who asked John when he got back each night, what'd you get? Did you get anything? Stress the importance that they will face some peer pressure. It's much more likely than not. And even if they don't say this, what they need to think in their mind is, you know what, I could cross that line anytime I want, but once I cross it, I can't cross back. And if you've already crossed it, you can't cross back. Again, they don't necessarily have to say that, they just need to understand it. They need to know it in a way that gives them the confidence of their convictions, that they're doing the right thing. Other issues, I highly recommend showing your boys, especially, it doesn't hurt to show this to the girls too, in the book what they call the law of progression. There's a little chart in the paperback book, it's on page 49. I looked in the hardcover book and it's on page 45. And that chart I've showed both to my boys, I think I've showed it to the girls, but more importantly, I've showed it to the boys that the girls were dating. My daughter Kristen's husband saw this when they were dating at some restaurant somewhere one Saturday morning. And I also showed this at some point to the young man who's dating Katie right now. It's important for them to understand what they call the law of progression. And that law is God has designed physical contact to lead to the next step. Each step is designed, we're programmed physically to be responsive and to lead to the next step. And what they advocate in the book is what they call a simple goodnight kiss. And I can't remember if I shared this with you or not, but as Kristen and John were dating, the couple that's married now, anytime John would come to visit, I would take him out either for breakfast or frozen yogurt or coffee. I would fill up his gas tank, and then we would have 45 minutes or an hour to talk and just get updated. A lot of times we just talk about school, what was going on with his major, what his job interviews were like, what he's gonna do that summer. It wasn't just talk about what the dating relationship was like, but there was almost always, at least, we almost always touched on the dating relationship. And one time I remember asking him, I had shown this law of progression probably 2 years earlier. And I remember asking him one day, I said, when it's just the two of you in Waco, there's nobody else around, how do you stay on the straight and narrow? And he looked me right in the eye and he said, simple goodnight kiss. And I said, simple what? He said, simple goodnight kiss. He says, from that chart you showed me 2 years ago. And what's on there, on the chart, it shows that if you go beyond a simple goodnight kiss, the body is programmed to continue to react sexually and to prepare for sexual intercourse. Ultimately, the further you go, the more steam it builds up in terms of your body's physiological reaction. And after I showed him that chart, I could not believe it had been such a long time later. I asked him that question. I didn't even remember where that came from when he gave me the answer, and there it was. He was thinking back to that breakfast and to that chart. So I do highly recommend that you literally, dads, for you especially, show this to your boys, and when girls are dating a boy that you're okay with, make sure you show this chart to that boy. He needs to understand. And what are the chances that he's not heard this from his father? Real high. Chances he's not heard this stuff from his dad are real high. You can't afford that with your daughter. So if he hasn't heard it from his dad, you don't have to go through all the stuff we're talking about, but you need to make sure you've gone through enough to help your daughter's guy who's dating her keep himself and herself on the straight and narrow path. That's the risk you take if you don't do this. You've got to at least have that much of a talk with him. I didn't talk about guns. I didn't talk about friends in law enforcement with any of these guys. You can do that if you want to. I love Joe White's talk about the people, the guys standing at the ready at the door, but I didn't do anything like that. But it is important to be frank and to be honest.
You sure didn't blow that up and frame it and give it to him?
Which, what?
That chart.
I did not.
16-inch.
But that's not a bad idea. I can make it that size at least, yeah,
So
Joe.
to give you a spin on what you just said.
Yep,
You talked about guys and girls and the importance on the guys.
yep.
Yes, on the girls, but not so much. I heard that in World War II, there was a lot of babies being made in England because in American culture at the time, it was the girl's job to say, no, 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 you better wait, stop. But in England, it was quite the inverse. It was the man's responsibility to say, no, 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 you better stop. And the girls were more, it was in their culture, to be more pushy on that. So naturally, when you get the two pluses and minuses tied up in wartime, a lot of babies were made. So how would they just talk to a crowd to say, if you don't know where they're coming from, what kind of daughters and boys are going to be made in the next 20 years?
Yeah. Yeah. I tell you what, I would say generally, stereotypically, we've talked about the difference between men and women generally. Men have the higher sex drive, and it certainly builds faster than the women. But
The forwardness.
these days, in this day and age, there's forwardness on both sides. There's no question about it. There's no question about it. We need to touch real quickly on masturbation. Masturbation is common male behavior. I don't think it's very common among females. I don't think it's absent, but it's very common among adolescent males. A couple weeks ago, you heard me talk about toddlers and preschoolers, and you heard Dr. Grace Ketterman and Dr. Dobson talking about them, kind of just exploring their bodies. Here we're talking about something very different. It's not just exploration. And it's very interesting. Scripture is silent on masturbation itself. And so there's a tendency among some people to say, well, it must be okay, Scripture doesn't really prohibit it. However, Scripture is not silent about lust, and lust is basically always accompanying masturbation. Guys are imagining somebody in masturbation. So I think it's a good idea to talk to our boys about it. I think it's a good idea to discourage it. At the same time, ladies, you just need to understand this is very common among adolescent boys. I've had over the years a few moms in the class that even came and talked to me afterwards and just were like, I just can't even deal with the thought of that. Like they just wanted to scourge it out of their boys. And my advice to you is, if you're feeling that way about it, you need to back off and let your husband handle it. And husbands, you need to talk to the boys about it. We should be talking to our boys about this. We need to talk to them about it. And they need to understand the essence of these scriptures, which, who's got Colossians 3, 1 through 5? Okay, go ahead.
Therefore, if you have been raised up with Christ, keep seeking the things above, where Christ is seated at the right hand of God. Set your mind on the things above, not on the things that are on earth. For you have died, and your life is hidden with Christ in God. When Christ, who is our life, is revealed, then you also will be revealed with him in glory. Therefore consider the members of your earthly body as dead to immorality, impurity, passion, evil desire, and greed, which amounts to idolatry.
So here we're talking about thinking on good things, and lust is simply not thinking on what God wants us to be thinking about. So guys, we need to be encouraging our sons that that's not part of what God wants us thinking about. 1 Thessalonians 4, 3 through 8. Okay, go ahead, Stephanie.
For this is the will of God, your sanctification, that is, that you abstain from sexual immorality, that each of you know how to possess his own vessel in sanctification and honor, not in lustful passion, like the Gentiles who do not know God, and that no man transgress and defraud his brother in the matter, because the Lord is the avenger in all these things, just as we also told you before and solemnly warned you. For God has not called us for the purpose of impurity, but in sanctification. So he who rejects this is not rejecting man, but the God who gives his Holy Spirit to you.
Okay, so again, we're talking about thoughts. We're talking about what we allow our minds to entertain. Who's got 2 Corinthians 10:5? Okay, go ahead.
We are destroying speculations and every lofty thing raised up against the knowledge of God, and we are taking every thought captive to the obedience of Christ.
Every thought captive to the obedience of Christ. It's just pretty hard to reconcile that with what's going on in the adolescent boy's mind during the act of masturbation. That is the problem with it. Matthew 5, 27 and 28.
You have heard that it was said, do not commit adultery. But I tell you, everyone who looks at a woman to lust for her has already committed adultery with her in his heart.
So we need to be reviewing these scriptures with the boys. They need to understand how God looks at this. But honestly, it doesn't cause blindness. It doesn't cause hair to grow on a boy's hand. It doesn't cause their hair to fall out. I don't recommend washing their mouth out with soap. I don't recommend, you know what, moms, it's probably just best if you just back out of this and let dad handle it. And dad, you need to be frank with the boys. But this is another one of those things where overreaction to something that's very common, and I'm not trying to excuse it, but an overreaction to something that's very common can be very counterproductive in the relationship, and especially in that boy feeling comfortable asking questions about other areas of sexuality. It is, in my opinion, far more important for us to keep that relationship open and keep the flow of communication back and forth than it is to try to drive out this sort of demon as we imagine it to be sometimes. So that's a little commentary on that. I want to address one more thing I just think is so critically important. Not all of us in this room were virgins when we stood at the altar. Some of us were, some of us were not. And does anyone remember what I encouraged you to do a few weeks ago as far as how to deal with your own past mistakes with your kids? I think we should just assume that your kids at some point are going to do what Joe White's, I think it was one of his boys, asked him, were you pure? Joe White was able to say yes. What do we do if we're not able to say yes?
Be honest.
Be honest. And what does that mean? Always be honest. It means we're not going to lie, but we only need to tell them what? What's in their best interest. So number one, first and foremost, do not allow your own past mistakes, whatever they might be, whether they're in the area of sexual purity, drug use, some other relationship issue, pornography, whatever it is, Don't let those things stop you from talking to your kids. What's important here isn't whether or not you feel like a hypocrite. You have to forget that. That's not the issue in dealing with your kids. If you have a load of baggage from something like that, talk to somebody about it. Talk to a pastor, talk to a counselor, talk to a close friend. Okay, deal with that one way or another, but don't let that stop you. Don't let that stand in the way of doing what you need to do with your kids, because you just have to do it. You have to do it for their sake, regardless of what's in your past. So if you've got something there, like Frank said, you must be honest. Don't tell them you were pure at the altar. If you weren't, there's no need to tell them that. But you don't have to give gory details either. You don't have to get out your calendar from 1982 and 1983 and say, well, here's what I did on these different dates and here's who I did it with. That's totally unnecessary. If you think one or more of your kids would benefit by hearing something more specific, by all means, feel free to share that with them if you think it's in their best interest, and only for that reason. But otherwise, you don't need to feel any obligation to share anything other than, I made some mistakes. I wish I could turn the clock back. I wish I could undo all that. I can't. I didn't have anyone cheering me on. I didn't have anyone giving me a purity ring. I didn't have anyone rallying me to stay pure and give myself to my wife or to my husband. You do. I am here to walk through this with you every step of the way, and you can do a much better job of this than I actually did. That's all you need to say. Have we talked about the possibility of your kids not staying committed? This is another thing. This is something I want to close with this tonight. Something I've become very concerned about in recent years is the idea that kids from good, solid, committed Christian homes who make a commitment to purity, will 100% of those kids maintain that commitment to marriage? Right? We know it's not going to be 100%. We know that. Can our kids be 100%? They can. Do we know for sure that they will be? We don't. I've become concerned in recent years that kids from good Christian homes that have good relationship with their parents and know the parents are cheering them on and respect their parents. Okay, these are kids with good relationships, positive relationships, that if they don't maintain, if they fail in the purity commitment, and the girl finds herself pregnant, or the boy's girlfriend finds herself pregnant, I worry that those kids will feel like they can talk to their parents less than kids who have not made any purity commitment at all. And that is just the time we don't want them doing something that we don't know about. In that circumstance, that is exactly the time we need to put our arms around them. You know, the very idea of kicking somebody out of the house, that's absurd in that situation. Patently absurd. But we need our kids to know that. And this is a fine line. I find this the most difficult fine line to walk, having these talks with my kids, because I'm stressing to them, look, I'm not encouraging you to lower the bar. I'm not encouraging you to lower your standards. I know you can do this, and I think you will do this. But I want you to know, there's that word but. You know, it's like that word but erases everything we just said. But it has to be there, right? So I know you can do this, but I also know that not every kid who makes a purity commitment will keep that commitment. And if you find that your girlfriend is pregnant, or if you, my daughter, find that you're pregnant, please talk to us. We're not going to throw you out. We might cry with you. We'll be upset with you. We want to walk through this with you. We don't want you to face something like that alone. We don't want you to make a mistake that we can tell you will follow you the rest of your life. Abortion is something that will follow that mother, and we're told that it won't. I can assure you it will. We're told that it won't. I can assure you it will follow her the rest of her life. We need our daughters to know in that moment we are there for them. And we need our sons and even our sons' girlfriends to know in that moment we will be there for them. So please, it's a tightrope. That to me is the finest line I have the most difficulty walking, Because I don't want to lower the standard, I don't want to lower the expectation, I don't want to not be rallying them on. It's almost like it's in parentheses at the end of everything else. It's like you can do this in big bold letters, and in parentheses, just in case, break glass here and I'm still here. I'm still here for you in case of emergency. Okay? So please make that part of your talks with your kids.
I know you meant to say it, but you focused on pregnancy. But yet, if they have a oops moment and nothing happened because of the oops moment.
Good
you
point,
still wanna
Jeremy.
talk about it.
Good point. You're absolutely right, Jeremy. We want them to be able to talk to us about anything. What I really get concerned about is that sexual activity without pregnancy is something they don't have to disclose,
Yeah.
right? They don't have to take any action. And so, but you're absolutely right. We want to maintain the dialogue, and we want to just be checking in with them casually, back to our discussion here. We want to be, and what Frank said, we want to be casually checking in with them. How's the relationship going? Like I did with John that evening. How do you guys do it when it's just the two of you? You're all by yourselves. But to your point, we do want to have that dialogue going. But what I really do seriously worry about is if there's a transgression, they go beyond the line, and someone does get pregnant, and they don't feel in that circumstance they can come and talk to us. So that's kind of what I'm emphasizing, but your point is well taken. Your point is well taken. Okay, I've kept you late. Let me close this quickly in prayer. Then I want to turn the camera off, and I want to share one more thing with you, just to be real quick. Heavenly Father, again, I just thank you so much for each parent in this room. And I thank you, I'm so encouraged for the sake of their kids, that they are here because they want to do what's right for their kids. They want to do what's right the way you have prescribed it and structured it and set it up for us. Jesus, thank you for creating us, knowing you'd have to redeem us. I ask that you bless these parents in a mighty way in their relationships with their kids. And I thank you for our time together. Jesus, it's in your name I pray. Amen. Okay, let me turn this off real quick.